Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to a special 5-part series I am running on a recent white paper released by SAI Global entitled Predicting Risk, a Strategic Culture Framework for the C-Suite. This white paper was authored by Caterina Bullgarella, and over the next 5 podcast episodes, I visit with her on various topics relating to this white paper. In episode 1, we introduce the strategic cultural framework. In episode 2, we consider what the board and C-suite need to know about ethical risk. In episode 3, we consider the differences between espoused ethics and actual goals of an organization. In episode 4, we use the cultural framework to take a look at the ethical failures of Wells Fargo and their fraudulent account scandal. In our concluding episode 5, we take a look at the ins and outs of ethical reasoning and take a look into the future. It will be a fascinating exploration for you. At the end of the 5 podcast series, you will be able to utilize the strategic cultural framework to help your organization measure not only what it espouses, but is it actually doing that in practice. In each episode, I link to the white paper itself so you can take a look at it and use it going forward. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist. This special 5-part series on predicting risk, a strategic cultural framework for the C-Suite, a white paper by SAI Global, is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back for part 4 of my 5-part exploration of the recently released SAI Global white paper, Predicting Risk, a Strategic Culture Framework for the C-Suite. Once again, I'm joined by Caterina Bullgarella. She is the Cultural Architect and Ethics Advisor in collaboration with SAI Global and the author of the report. We've been going through the background to the framework itself, and then how you would move to bridge gaps using the framework. And today we're going to take it to a very practical level. I've asked Caterina to detail for us what she sees, or rather how the framework assesses risk at Wells Fargo in light of their 2016 fine and penalty for fraudulent account scandal. It's a fascinating case study in the white paper. I'm going to commend you to read it. It's only a few pages, but frankly, I'm greatly looking forward to this. So with that incredibly long-winded introduction, Caterina, thank you, and thank you for taking the time to visit with me again.
Thank you, Tom, for having me. It's a pleasure to be back on and to continue the conversation. And just jumping into just that question, let me, before I talk about Wells Fargo, I want to spend a few minutes really highlighting a key component of the framework, because it's and I'm referring particularly to the way leadership and power are exercised in an organization, which is a huge component of the culture of any organization. And it's a huge component of a huge determinant of whether the organization is delegating ethical dilemmas or not, as well as the nature of those dilemmas and the type of pressure that may arise from them, which, by the way, are all very relevant, just a sort of thoughts to hold on to as we think about what happened in the Wells Fargo case. It's interesting that we, by and large, talk about leadership and middle managers in terms of tone in the middle and tone at the top. And when we say tone in the middle and tone at the top, we are referring to the extent to which managers and leaders acknowledge ethical principles and appear to behave in a way that is consistent with those principles. That is very important. That is key, but it's not the whole story. We should also take into consideration whether and how leaders, managers shape dilemmas, which may have to do with their personal biases, their personal beliefs about their role, and how that role should be played out, right? So a leader who speaks highly of the company's values may demonstrate the right type of tone, but she may unwittingly provide guidance to her team that stresses competing priorities, creating dangerous pressure. So, for example, a manager who tells employees get it done, and then she says, "I don't care how you get it done," is putting tremendous emphasis on results at the expense of ethical performance. The one thing to keep in mind is that leaders may do so because they feel under pressure themselves, and they may believe that their job as leaders has to do with just placing pressure downward, right? So if I, as a leader, hold that very belief, maybe sort of blind to the very trade-offs that I'm going to create for my team. And which, by the way, that is a form of motivated blindness. So in that respect, just the pressure has, just interesting ways to sort of manifest and play out. I also want to point out, and I mentioned this in a previous segment, but I want to sort of also highlight how any form of abusive conduct when it comes to leaders and managers is likely to weaken basic, ethical principles. And it is likely to be in contrast with certain expectations about fair treatment. So, and I'm saying all of this just to emphasize the incredible influence the leaders and managers have on the culture of the organization, and therefore on risk and ethical performance. So if we go back to just Wells Fargo, which is a perfect example of leading under pressure, an example that it sort of shows how certain misguided and influence and poor conduct may originate from that situation of pressure. What's interesting there is that if we start looking at what was happening in that organization prior to their scandal, it all started with their CEO Kovacevic. He was at the time Wells Fargo CEO, who had really, truly sort of a vision, innovative vision, and he saw unprecedented growth opportunities for the organization. So, in his view, these opportunities could be unleashed if Wells Fargo acted as an emporium of financial services in which associates did their best to convince customers to buy seemingly interdependent services. That vision was operationalized through an aggressive cross-selling credo. I wanna remind everybody that Wells Fargo had corporate values. In fact, I think its values were something along the lines of integrity, respect, and principled performance. But next to those values, the organization developed this powerful cross-selling credo and very ambitious sales targets that had all kinds of incentives attached to them. The leaders at the regional level were given significant autonomy to execute. And at the same time, they were likely put under a lot of pressure to deliver through positive and negative incentives. we know what happened, right? We know that, even if we think, if we take into account what was happening in terms of, ethical capacity, again, regionally, a certain autonomy was created, but not real ownership. People, of course, were asked to go through certain training modules. They were given a code of conduct. But those resources compared to the type of pressures that employees of Wells Fargo were exposed to, those resources were not sufficient. By and large, the culture was a culture that tended to squash ethical voice. Looking at the behavior of regional leaders and local managers, these stakeholders started demanding blind allegiance, and they also started engaging in retaliatory behavior, against employees who felt uncomfortable with the demands they were receiving and the targets they were being held accountable to. This culture of total downward pressure and limited ethical capacity caused people to, resort to all kinds of things to do what they were being asked to do. So the interesting thing, we are sort of revisiting all these facts and looking at them from a distance. So we don't know if there was any type of malicious intent in what went down at the Wells Fargo during those years. And it doesn't make any sense to speculate. What's interesting, however, is that the Wells Fargo story is a cautionary tale for leaders in general, because it demonstrates how they can be, in a way, victimized by their own ambitions and vision. Science, and this is something worth keeping in mind. Science tells us that it's not always the case that unethical outcomes derive from malicious intent. It may suffice to give in to an excessively ambitious yet very enticing vision for the slippery slope to begin and spiral down into systemic bad behavior. And I think that's what we saw happening at Wells Fargo when all that I just described unfolded.
Well, Caterina, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but I wanted to thank you for your thoughts on Wells Fargo as analyzed under the framework. I hope our listeners will join us for our concluding episode, part 5, where we're going to take a look at the ins and outs of ethical reasoning and then take a veiled look into the future, which is always one of my favorite things to speculate upon. So, Caterina, with that, thank you very much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thank you, Tom, for having me. Look forward to the next segment.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'm the Compliance Evangelist. I hope you've enjoyed this episode in my special 5-part series on the SAI Global White Paper entitled Predicting Risk, a Strategic Cultural Framework for the C-Suite, and my visit with the White Paper's author, Caterina Bullgarella. I hope you'll join us again for our next episode. This podcast series is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.